This program contains explicit language some people might find confronting.
For more than a century, Australian rules football has captivated the nation.
Oh, just so let go, you beauties!
I see it, but I don't believe it! Streaming through! Bang! Bang, bang, bang!
I loved it because it's the most egalitarian sport. Doesn't matter how tall you are, how big you are, whoever's got the sherrin in hand is the most important person in the world at that moment.
Storytelling, symbolism, ceremony. I mean, if it was in a pint glass, I'd just pour it over my head. I love that about the game.
But football's egalitarian spirit belies a traditionally hypermasculine culture where gay players still haven't found an entirely safe space.
It's a feeling of complete isolation and a feeling that if you want to be a part of that game, a part of that situation, you have to hide yourself.
I thought that if anyone found out that I was gay, that they would hate me, that they would think I was disgusting, because that was how they spoke all the time.
On the one hand, football is an incredibly supportive and nurturing culture.
We will put our arms around you, and if there was a dissenting voice, they will be told to shut the fuck up or get out.
A lot of talk, I mean,
On the other hand, there's decades of homophobia.
That is just an annoyingly gratuitous act. What? Kissing your boyfriend.
I am up here getting ready. He's a big poofter. I mean, give him this one, Harry.
It's the toxic culture that they have allowed to continue.
Do you think, given the statistics in the AFL, that the AFL is a world leader in tackling homophobia?
No, I think it's clear that we're not.
Australian rules football is the only major sporting code in the world that hasn't had a single male player in the elite competition, present or even past, publicly identify as gay. In this episode of Four Corners, we investigate what is it about the culture in the AFL that has created this silence.
This man held on to a secret for more than a decade.
I was about sort of 12 or 13. I started realising sort of who I was as a person. I started noticing that there wasn't people like me around AFL. There wasn't, coaches, there wasn't AFL players. I realised that the change rooms in the football field was just not a place that accepted me.
And so you stopped playing?
Stopped playing completely, yeah.
Let's get a move on.
He returned to football in his 20s and now plays for Sydney's UNSW Eastern Suburbs Bulldogs team. In the change rooms in the bowels of Henson Park, they're pulling on their rainbow socks. Today, the Dogs are playing in a gay pride round.
They're not anywhere near as good as us. We make them feel it today, yeah? Let's go. 1, 2, 3.
These rounds are really helpful for that. The people to see that everyone's completely normal, everything is fine here. There's nothing to fear, there's nothing to worry about.
The sky's not going to fall.
The sky is not going to fall in.
This man is shrugging off the silence and the shame.
Hi, boys. Let's get out there.
He's gay and he's proud.
I'm Michael O'Donnell and I want everyone to feel safe and comfortable on the football field. We exist, and unless we tell people that we exist, they don't know about us. And so it's a really good opportunity to show younger people that there is a place for them in the game.
What they are choosing is to not be the first person.
Thanks for all the support.
Finding a place for gay male players in the elite game of football is something the AFL is still struggling with. In April, AFL CEO Gillan McLachlan confirmed to reporters there are gay players currently in AFL clubs, but the comments he made after that raised eyebrows.
So the pressure and the weight of being that person is known to be the first AFL player who comes out and plays as an out gay man. I think that weight and I frankly understand why they would choose not to have to carry that burden around forever.
What do you think about that choice of words?
It's absolutely a burden, not being able to be yourself.
I mean, you know what's a burden? A burden is having to hide who you are every single day. A burden is not being able to talk about your relationships, about what you're doing on the weekend, because people might figure out your sexuality. That's a burden. Being a role model, being open about who you are, being proud of who you are, it's not a burden. It's a privilege.
What would you
Michael O'Donnell used to work in communications for the Melbourne Football Club, so he understands the power of good messaging.
If he can't use the right words then, that suggests to me that it hasn't been discussed on a higher level or on a wider basis, and that's quite concerning.
Why is that concerning?
Because it means they're not prepared. If the AFL aren't prepared for a player to come out, they're in denial, and it creates a bit of a vacuum as well.
Tanya Hosh is the AFL's General Manager of Inclusion and Social Policy.
I can understand why Gil used that word. You know, I can see how that would feel like a burden to people.
Speaking to LGBTIQ plus players and advocates, they say that that was a negative word to use.
Yeah.
Surely that was a time, these people say to us, when the leader of the AFL could have made a positive statement.
Yeah, look, I think it's really good to hear that that's how it's been perceived. Certainly, you know, that framing you just gave about the positive alternative and that encouragement, I've heard Gil do that as well. And, you know, he was very strong around the marriage equality issue, and I think has demonstrated in lots of settings that his support is absolutely there.
To get a sense of why the silence has been so pervasive, you have to look at the history. Over many years, poking fun at gay people was a staple of programs like The Footy Show.
There's a new gay church up there. There's a bit of a difference. Only every second person kneels.
Sammy, if you're still watching there, mate, next time Roland takes your temperature, make sure it is actually a thermometer, all right?
It was just random jokes, little subtle words where you hear it constantly and it really digs into you. Hearing those sort of words, it internalises your homophobia and it creates a sort of self-perpetuating hate within you as well. And that can be really, really difficult to deal with and something that I dealt with for a really, really long time.
Back in the 1990s, there was another young amateur footballer who was also scared to reveal his true self. His name was Matt Hall. In 1996, he contracted HIV. Decades later, Matt Hall made this film to raise awareness about the disease.
Dealing with your own mortality as a 23-year-old is nothing I'd wish upon any person.
The Victorian Amateur Football Association banned Matt Hall from playing because of his diagnosis. Matt's doctor, Darren Russell, helped him fight that decision.
He just wanted to play footy, and he should be able to play footy. And so we spoke about that, and in the end he decided to fight against that decision. And I was incredibly proud of him for doing that. It was really an amazing thing for a young man to do.
Please welcome Matt. Joins us tonight on The Footy Show.
Matt decided that in order to change hearts, he needed to go on mainstream footy media.
Tell us first of all.
So he came to me and he said, I've got this situation, I've got HIV and I'm being banned from playing football. And we said, right, okay, this is a big story.
Why did you put your hand up?
I was reassured that I was 100% safe
from my doctor.
Matt was fearful because of everything around him, but so courageous in stepping up and having this conversation.
And my T cells, which is your immune system.
Eddie Maguire supported Matt Hall.
At the moment.
Well, good on you, mate. I hope we're talking to you in about 50 years' time. And all the best, mate.
I hope I am anyhow.
Matt Hall won his case in the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal.
He went public with the fact that he had HIV, but he didn't go public with his other secret.
And looking back, it's pretty incredible, really, when you think about it. He came out as having HIV in 1998 as a young sportsman in Melbourne, one of the first in the world, really, to do that. And yet, he couldn't come out as being gay or didn't feel he could. It was another 4 years before he was able to do that. Maybe that says something about all of us as a society and the football community, that it was easier having HIV than it was to be gay.
In 2002, Matt came out publicly as gay, the first Australian rules footballer, albeit an amateur player, ever to do so. During those years, the Australian government was confronting persistent homophobia in sport.
So in 2000, the Australian government issued what we would call a compliance directive to all of the major sports in Australia. And that compliance directive essentially said, we have a serious homophobic language and discrimination problem, and you are legally required to do something about it. It didn't say this sometimes happens or occasionally happens. It said these behaviors are widespread in sport. You have a legal and human rights obligation to do something about it.
The government warned sports that they risked costly litigation. It told them that they needed to set up a sophisticated anti-discrimination policy, that they had to create an elaborate complaints process to keep a record of complaints and to create meaningful anti-homophobia campaigns. Every single step of the process was carefully laid out.
2 years later, journalist Richard Watts was doing some research on homophobia in football, and he checked on the progress in implementing those guidelines.
What did you find when you went to the clubs in 2002?
None of them had acted on those guidelines. They didn't even know it existed.
What did you make of that?
I was somewhat flabbergasted.
What do you think that it demonstrated that the AFL's attitude was to that document?
I think it demonstrated that homophobia wasn't really on their radar.
21 years later, Four Corners decided to check with the AFL clubs and head office to see if they had fully implemented the steps laid out in the warning. We thought it a fairly uncontroversial proposition, but we were met with some defensive responses. One media executive labelled our questions aggressive. One club said that it couldn't reveal the information for privacy reasons, and another banned us from filming on the premises from that time forward.
The AFL, as a governing body, has introduced a complaints process. But we found that while some clubs have done more than others, none have fully implemented the guidelines.
And I just wonder, why is it that some of the AFL clubs and some parts of the AFL industry are so defensive about questions that go to important issues?
Yeah, I'm surprised to hear that. I'm really surprised to hear that there would be defensiveness about policies that, we're constantly reviewing and updating to make sure that they don't become irrelevant and stale, and that we don't, have knee-jerk reactions to a moment of crisis, so to speak. It's updating, briefing club leadership around what all of our responsibilities are to create an environment that is free from discrimination, and that is a really high priority.
Smart Arts. News, reviews and interviews about the arts with Richard Watts.
And a very good morning to you. Richard with you here.
Working as an arts journalist and broadcaster, Richard Watts has also been a gay activist for many years.
So we're going to be looking at...
Back in the early noughties, he began to support his childhood team, Collingwood, after a long hiatus.
I didn't like football. I associated it with the guys who bullied me at school. And then in my 20s, a friend took me to a game and I went, oh, it's actually a fun game. But I would go to games and I would hear homophobic abuse and I thought it needed to be challenged and I thought it needed to be called out. I just called up the Collingwood Football Club one day and said, do you have a gay and lesbian supporters group? And they said, no, we'd be interested in having a conversation, come on in. All that and more on the show today. Hope you can stick around for a while. But
Richard Watts told Collingwood he wanted to call the group the Pink Magpies. The next day, when he was broadcasting his radio program, he got a call.
The receptionist literally kind of put the phone down, looked at me very puzzled and went, Richard, Eddie Maguire is on the phone for you?
Eddie Maguire also wanted a gay supporter group, so the Pink Magpies became the first organisation of its kind in the AFL. Today there are rainbow pride clubs for many teams. You set up the Pink Magpies in August 2001, 22 years ago. Still, to this day, not a single AFL player, present or past, has publicly identified as gay.
Which baffles me and to me says something about not necessarily overt homophobia, but covert homophobia in the AFL. I believe there must be some kind of pressure keeping people in the closet.
If you're a 14 or 15-year-old and you're gay, you can come to a football club, you can be part of it.
So you were quietly behind the scenes, really an ally of the gay community in helping set up the Pink Magpies.
Yeah.
And often on the footy show as well, when there were arguments and so on about these issues, you were actually coming in defence of the gay community.
Yeah.
But there were lots of comments made that were really hurtful to gay people in that forum and in other football forums.
Yeah, there were, yeah. I'm not being defensive of football, but I see football as being a microcosm of the community. You are going to have people who fervently believe it's wrong because of their religious convictions or whatever the case may be, or they just don't think it's right, or they don't like the lifestyle of some people who are gay, etc., etc. As you know, some people like red wine, some people like white wine. There's no, but if you have got enough opportunity, particularly on footy shows like that, where I always feel that it's good to have some knuckleheads. It's good to have this discussion come, and then you can have the debate, not even a debate, then you can have the conversation.
The only thing I'd be uncomfortable with if I was in the showers.
Drop the soap.
And no, in the showers and I knew a player was gay and we're all showering together. And
As time wore on, smutty innuendo on football media became something more intense.
It made me worried about what other people would think about me if I was gay, and in change rooms, there's showers, there's those sort of things, and it really did scare me.
In 2010, the AFL Players Association decided it needed to stand firm against homophobia in the game. It drafted Western Bulldogs star Jason Ackermanis to write about it in his regular newspaper column. But the column that appeared in the paper caused a scandal.
The controversial forward says gay footballers should stay in the closet.
I think some footballers think there's something wrong with people, they have some kind of disease, but I don't think that, of course.
Ackermanis, who is now a real estate agent in Brisbane, has always been a divisive figure. But he believes he represents a view still held by many in football. He does say the newspaper's headline was not true to his words.
It was changed a lot, but nowhere was there like stay in the closet or anything like that. I just said, why would you bother? Do you think about it? We don't care. It's up to you. Back then I was like, well, give them a different slant. Why would you want to? You think about it. Is it worth it? They're good questions to ask. You've got to weigh it up. It is a burden. It's a heavy burden.
What was the feeling in your gut when you saw those words in print?
I was disgusted. I was embarrassed. And I was hurt. But then the hurt took a turn. What if one of my teammates is gay?
Bob Murphy was a player in the Western Bulldogs leadership team at the time Jason Ackermanis wrote the column. It's the first time he's agreed to an interview about this subject. We showed Bob Murphy the news coverage from the time.
I think some footballers think there's something wrong with people, they have some kind of disease, but I don't think that, of course.
Murphy and other players confronted Ackermanis, and it led to a breakdown in trust that ultimately saw the Bulldogs sack Ackermanis. Murphy still struggles to say his name.
I did want to get on record with the author and say, I think what I said to him was that abhorrent shit that you wrote in the paper. For me, at that time in my life, I was like, well, we're done.
You were branded as a homophobe for writing that column. Are you a homophobe?
Yeah, I got branded everything, homophobic, you name it. Just because I write about it and you don't agree with it doesn't mean that I'm like, that would mean that I'm scared of gay people, which is just complete crap. Look, I personally don't care one way or the other. As long as you don't sort of throw it in my face or try and tell me where I'm not interested, then, I don't go around telling anyone what I do in my private life.
There were people who disagreed with what you said. What about the people who were hurt by what you said?
Well, I always say anyone that's hurt, that's your issue, it's your problem. So if you need to seek counselling, go and do it.
The hurt continued. In 2012, the Saints' Stephen Milne used a homophobic slur right in the middle of the MCG.
The umpire said then that was reckless. They'll certainly have a look at it later in the week as well.
50 metres as well. That language is unacceptable.
The slur had a galvanising effect. Watching was a young footballer from Melbourne's Yarra Valley. Jason Ball, who was an amateur player, decided to stand up to be part of change.
I had an actual experience of what it was like to hear homophobic language, what it was like to feel like I wouldn't be accepted, like I had to hide who I was, like I had to choose between being who I was and playing the game that I loved. And so that was why I wanted to share my story.
Jason Ball now works in London for an LGBTIQ+ charity. He's a passionate activist. But back in 2012, he became the second Australian rules footballer, after Matt Hall, to come out publicly as gay. Jason Ball was the face of a Change.org petition.
The petition specifically asked the AFL to show No to Homophobia ads on the big screen and to commit to a Pride round. It was about a few days after my petition was launched that I got a call from the then CEO, Andrew Demetrio, who said that the AFL would screen No to Homophobia ads on the big screen during the finals.
He expected the floodgates to open. They didn't.
Yeah, the floodgates didn't open. I was hoping that would be an example for an AFL player who was in my situation to know that it can be okay. We've since had other players come out in other leagues all around the world and here in Australia. But sure enough, here in the AFL, it's the one code where there's no male player who, yet past or present, has felt comfortable enough to come out.
Brock McLean, a talented midfielder for Carlton and the Melbourne Demons, supported Jason Ball at the time he came out. Brock was one of two professional AFL players who were the first in the competition to ever walk in Melbourne's Gay Pride March.
I just remember on the day, I didn't think it was a big deal. Like, all I was doing is just walking with someone down Fitzroy Street. But I had so many gay people who were there that day, and they said, you have no idea how much, this means to me. And I was like, if that's all it takes to make a huge difference, to such a marginalised community of people, then, you know, that's the least I can do.
Brock McLean has retired from professional football now and plays for a team in a small country town.
Oh, yeah. Tom's got a media release. Oh, here we go. Don't be shy now, boys. Don't be shy. Yeah, I'm not.
He's not gay, but he knows what it's like to feel isolated and alone inside the change rooms of the hyper-masculine world of football.
Oh, that's it. Well done today. Here we go. Come on. Feed off each other. Head over it. Work for each other today.
When Brock was marching with Jason Ball, his team didn't know he was mentally tormented and abusing narcotics.
There was a good couple of years there where suicidal ideation was something that I experienced on a daily basis. I couldn't talk to anyone about it because it would have been emasculating and a huge sign of failure and weakness. So I could certainly empathise with, you know, anyone who might have been hiding their own sexuality.
Bob Murphy also feels passionate about speaking up against homophobia in the sport he loves. He considers himself a strong ally of the gay community, and that's why he's chosen to talk about a memory he's ashamed of from his early days in football.
I was playing in the forward line and I was going through what would be commonly known as the goal-kicking yips. It's where you're not just missing goals, you are completely mentally ravaged. Like, you go from missing goals, like easy goals, to you not even getting close.
Murphy, who now works for the Fremantle Dockers, remembered something he'd often say to himself when he was missing those goals.
And I would refer to myself as a fucking poofter, you fucking poofter. And at the time, I didn't even... It was a thoughtless... I was just thinking about the goal and the technique and the mental anguish but that's what I said to myself. I hated it about myself so much, and it then forces you to ask deeper questions like, why? Why is that your reaction? And then you start, who walked behind me? Who else was around? What if a gay footballer who I played with, who would have assumed I was an ally, heard me talk like that about myself in a way that's self-flagellation, you know.
Equating poofter with weak.
Yep. And sitting here with you is me trying to create that space of putting myself out there and giving my support credibility by also saying, I'm not perfect and I've got something that I'm deeply ashamed of. And if I hurt someone, I'll never get over it.
The homophobic language often starts at junior football, where many studies have found slurs are commonplace. UNSW Eastern Suburbs Bulldogs president Ian Dunstan has seen it too.
So they use words they don't even know. I've had to go to the tribunal with a 12-year-old who used an inappropriate word.
What was the word?
Like faggot. Right? Faggot is a very common term with teenage boys. And I got to the tribunal and he was charged with, inappropriate language. And went to the tribunal, had absolutely no idea what he'd said.
The constant use of homophobic language, the constant use of sexist language as a means to assert one's sort of masculinity and toughness, it kind of just felt like it went hand in hand with the game. It was part and parcel of the culture. It was expected. And, I took that really seriously when I heard it. I thought that if anyone found out that I was gay, that they would hate me.
Dr. Eric Dennison is one of the country's leading experts on collating data on homophobic language in sport.
The idea that AFL is safe and inclusive and welcoming for gay people is just, it's fiction. It's a delusion. It's not true.
So if we want to come up and we'll take it in turns.
Dr. Dennison charted how, in 2014, then AFL CEO Andrew Demetriou pledged to take action to make the code a world leader in tackling homophobia.
Vilification based on sexual identity is just as serious as an offence as vilification based on gender, race, religion.
And in that commitment, it says that homophobic behaviour and other things are widespread in sport and cause serious harm to children. So we signed that. They've committed to do something about it. And now people who are harmed by that could seek compensation from them because they've admitted there's a problem. Since 2014, we've done analysis of the different sports, looking at who's taken action, who hasn't, and the AFL is way at the bottom.
Andrew Demetriou was the CEO of the AFL, and he promised that the AFL would be a world leader in tackling homophobia. Do you think, given the statistics in the AFL, that the AFL is a world leader in tackling homophobia?
No, I think it's clear that we're not. But, you know, certainly it's a great ambition for us to be a world leader, but we're certainly not there yet. There's different work happening across the states. What I would say, though, is openly acknowledge that we've got a lot more to do at large across the entire code, and I think we're putting the right building blocks in place to be, you know, a stronger contributor.
Since 2016, the Sydney Swans and St Kilda have hosted an annual Pride match. The Swans released this Pride chant this year. Chloe Clark is an activism coordinator at Amnesty International. She's been trying unsuccessfully for years to get other teams in the AFL men's competition to agree to a Pride round.
What does the research show about Pride rounds?
It shows that even by having the conversation, that homophobic behaviour and language rapidly changes. It shows that people are very receptive to this. It shows that if you do an entire Pride round and you take people on that journey with you, you take people on that and you educate them, it shows that, you know, the likes of homophobic use of language can reduce 40%.
How does the AFL compare to other sports when it comes to tackling homophobia?
They just don't compare to other sports.
2 months ago, the AFL Players Association released a report based on a survey of AFL players. The footballers described a culture of silence, where they felt threatened by the potential consequences of speaking out.
It talks about the culture of silence, but there's one big, giant silence that isn't discussed in that report, and that is the one that we're speaking about today.
Yeah, and it's this is a topic that I think we all are very interested in. I think players have felt very uncomfortable taking issue or talking up about things that potentially negatively impact the team. It's something we need to keep working on because, you know, at its core, these are people issues, and I think at times you've got to actually put the performance of the team as a secondary consideration if people's rights are people are being harmed through what's happening within the industry.
Everyone has the right to be who they are and to express that and to be safe doing so. It's absolutely a human rights issue that no one can or is openly gay within the AFL at the moment.
Yeah, it is. However, we also are told by clubs and club leaders that they do know who their gay teammates are, and they're just choosing not to make it more widely public.
But why are they choosing that? Because they don't feel safe. They don't feel safe going to the Brownlow and flagging that this is their male partner. So it's not about necessarily having a big press conference and telegraphing to the world who you are, but just living your life.
Well, certainly I know that the data suggests that, people who are having to not live as they wish to, loving who they love, certainly do have real disadvantages in being able to perform at their best in all parts of their life. So really aware of how important that is. My message is, I'm sorry that is your experience, and I hope that it doesn't remain so. And if you do want to find a way to express to me or others within football what it is that will make a difference for you, please do let us know. We want to support you and stand with you.
When we asked every single AFL club if they could provide current male players who could discuss this issue, not one of them accepted. I've made dozens of calls to men across the AFL about this topic, and I often got the impression that they found the conversation kind of awkward. They'd say, "Oh, this is very sensitive, Louise." I spoke to current and former players, and yes, I did meet with one who confirmed that he is gay. Some of the players were initially very enthusiastic about the conversation, but then they'd just disappear. They'd go silent. Shifting the dial in the AFL has been the arrival of the women's game. The women are not silent. Izzy Huntington was a star player at the Western Bulldogs, who is now at Greater Western Sydney.
Part of the uniqueness of AFLW has been that real emphasis on inclusion and an incredibly safe space for the queer community, which I guess in sport isn't all too common.
For Izzy Huntington, this isn't just a theoretical proposition. She came out after several years of playing AFLW.
You sort of get a lot of comments, "Oh, well, women's footy is just flooded with lesbians," and it's not. Society is really. It's just that that space is welcoming enough and inclusive enough that people feel comfortable to be themselves and come out, which is really, really beautiful. And I wish that we could replicate in all areas of society.
Contrast that with the men's game.
Yeah, I think the contrast is pretty remarkable. The fact that there aren't any openly gay players in the men's game or queer players is problematic, I think. It can be a pretty toxic sort of culture at some points.
That toxic culture has bled into the women's game. Izzy Huntington showed Four Corners some of the homophobic and misogynistic trolling she's received.
I think it shows just how far we've got to go in this space. As long as we stay silent on these sorts of comments and homophobic behaviours and homophobic slurs, whether it be at the grounds or in the locker rooms, at teams or online, I think then it becomes an accepted thing.
Hawthorn captain Tilly Lucas-Rodd is one of 4 non-binary players who've played AFLW. The club produced a video to tell Tilly's story to the fans.
My name's Tilly and I'm the Hawthorn AFLW captain. For me, the label non-binary kind of feels most comfortable about how I identify in terms of my gender.
The coming out experience of players is perhaps the most extraordinary juxtaposition between the men's and women's game.
One thing for me I was contemplating in that year before I came out as non-binary was, can I just keep hiding it and live this way and be fine with it? But when you come out, I think everything gets better, and that's the same as footy. My team and the staff around me, I guess, have fully embraced me, and it, I guess, means that you can live authentically, and it probably makes you a better person. It made me a better leader and a better footballer because there's no part of me now that I have to hide, and I can just authentically be Tilly.
By contrast, in the men's game, Danielle Laidley, formerly a tough player and coach nicknamed the Junkyard Dog, was brutally outed as trans by Victoria police officers who arrested her on drugs charges. But Danielle Laidley was embraced by her football mates. She's contracted to star in a documentary.
Footy World went, hang on a second.
what are you doing to one of ours? How dare you? How dare you? And Danny came in to see me after a period of time, and we were talking about doing the documentary, and Danny said to me, I thought football would kill me. It saved my life. And at that moment I thought, you know what? It is a pretty good game. Yeah, we have our problems, we muck up, but there's a genuine concern for people.
I think stigma relating to HIV still exists.
It was Eddie Maguire who reminded me, during my research, of the story of Matt Hall. But when I Googled Matt's name, the first mention I found was an obituary from 10 days before.
My heart sunk. I was really saddened that Matt had passed, and I think it's important that he's remembered in this film that you're doing on this. And he played a major role. Yeah, Matt should not be forgotten.
I've been living with it for so long.
Matt Hall died unexpectedly after 27 years living with HIV and working to fight stigma against his disease and his sexuality.
He passed before his time. He did an amazing amount of good, and I'm not sure he was aware how much good he actually did. Sorry. I think he'll be missed. He's done a lot of good work for people living with HIV and for gay guys, and he's done a lot of good work for footy. And now people can play footy if they have HIV, and they should be able to be gay if they play footy too.
That's what Michael O'Donnell thinks too. So he's living by example.
At no point has someone ever said, I wish I was still in the closet. It doesn't exist. The weight that comes off your shoulders is extraordinary. I think it would absolutely make you a better player because you can focus more on that. It's a pretty big weight to carry, and getting rid of that, I think, would help you soar. Good, Em.
Good, Luce. Good shepherd.
Nice, Joe.
Michael O'Donnell doesn't believe in coaxing anyone out of the closet. He just wants anyone who's thinking about coming out to know it's going to be okay.
I lost 15 years because there was no one ahead of me. And if we can have someone come out and stop that happening, there will be, a bunch of young, very talented AFL players who end up in the top level of the game. And that would be awesome, and that'd be a great legacy for someone to leave.
It will transform lives. It will save lives. To have a role model in the AFL, to know that young people who are gay are not going to be put into a box. They can still be anything. They can still be anyone. They can still be an AFL footballer.
Demolish the closet and you'll be a better player and a happier person.
And what will the Rainbow fans be doing?
We'll be cheering them on.
Tristan, you're going to go to a half-back, all right, mate? Try and give us a little bit of run. They're a bit small down there, aren't they, all right? They're pretty quick.
Also cheering them on will be some former footy players who know what it's like to doubt themselves and to feel alone.
Please call me. I'll give my number to Louise. You can get in touch with her. You can call me, you can text me, you can email me, whatever the case is. I'll always have your back no matter what.
Come on, let's have it. Come on.
You will be fought for. You'll be supported. And if there was a dissenting voice, they will be told to shut the fuck up or get out. I would think that a player to stand up in front of his teammates and say, I'm gay and I'm one of you and I want you to accept me, that would be like a superpower for your football team and your football club. And please, I want a gay footballer in my football club so we can get up and wrap our arms around him and say, you're one of us, we love you, you're brave, you're braver than anyone in this league, so that makes us braver than everyone else. And that will help us win. And then we might get change.